All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the fourth session of the Hunter to Hunter Connective Conversations webinar series. Tonight we have some great presenters that will talk about bovine tuberculosis and CWD testing and surveillance efforts in Michigan. Just wanted to remind you that MSU is an affirmative action and equal opportunity employer, and we do not discriminate, and everybody is welcome and encouraged to join our programs. So with that, I have two quick polls. The first question, I've asked this a couple times, but have you ever participated in an MSU extension program prior to this, this webinar series? So I'll just give you a second to... Okay. All right, we see we've got some people joining, so I'll just give this a couple more seconds. If you can just say, indicate if you have ever participated in an extension program. All right. So we're about 50-50, so that's cool. If you have not participated in an MSU Extension program, MSU Extension has offices in every county in Michigan, and we have a variety of programming areas, from agriculture to health and nutrition, 4-H youth programming, government and policy. There's something for everybody, so definitely get to know the folks in your MSU Extension office. My second question is, are you currently affiliated with a hunting organization like QDMA, MUCC, or a local sporting club? Oh, I have to launch the poll. There you go. Give that a couple more seconds. So we've got a little bit of mix of both. That's great. Okay, great. Thanks so much for answering those questions for me to help me get a better feel of who's with us. So I'm going to now turn it over to our panelists, and Emily, let me find your presentation quick. Bear with us, folks. We've had a little technical issues today. All right, let me try this again.
Do you need to stop sharing the poll first?
Possibly. That. Okay. Has the poll stopped showing?
No.
No. Okay. Shoot. All right. How's that?
Looks promising.
Okay. There we go. All right. I will turn it over to Emily.
There we are. Thank you, Katie. So I am Emily Sewell. I am the DNR's Wildlife Health Specialist for the Northern Lower Peninsula. I focus on working with TB in Northeast Michigan, and really spend my time engaging with our hunters and agricultural producers, especially cattle producers in that area, to help address the bovine TB issue. So as Katie mentioned before, our topic tonight is a status update and go over the 2020 surveillance plan for both bovine tuberculosis and chronic wasting disease. Because I cover bovine tuberculosis, and that's kind of my area, I'll cover the bovine tuberculosis update, and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Straka. So the picture that you see here on our intro slide is of our wildlife disease lab, where all the magic happens when you turn in your TB heads or CWD heads, or send something down to the lab. So that's what you don't usually get to see, and where Kelly is stationed, Dr. Straka. So bovine TB, as I said, that's where we're going to start. And I really appreciate the time that you are allowing for me to speak about this disease. It is not something that has got the attention of our hunters statewide that chronic wasting disease has, because bovine tuberculosis is a disease in our deer herd that we have been addressing and managing for decades. So it was first detected back in 1975 and in Alcona County in Northeast Michigan, and then didn't go detected again until 1994. And for the most part, it has really stayed up in those Northeast counties, and we'll go over that in a minute. But I just wanted to give a review, because most hunters are aware of this, but kind of maybe have really not paid much attention to it since CWD has taken over. But bovine TB really is an important disease for several reasons, and so I think it's worth a quick review. It is caused by a bacteria, particularly a mycobacterium, and really what that means is this is a really tricky disease to manage, and there's a couple reasons for that. One, the mycobacterium is really able to persist in the environment, so it's easy to get picked up by deer or cattle or other mammals, and it's not something that goes away quickly because of this waxy coating around it. And it's also a sneaky disease. It's something that can infect an animal or a person for that matter, and you don't even necessarily know you have it until later stages, and you become, or the animal becomes, immune compromised, and you show those later stages of the disease. So it's a chronic, slow growing infectious disease. And what's really important and different from chronic wasting disease is that this is a zoonotic disease. It's a known zoonotic disease, and so it can be transmitted, and has been transmitted, from deer and cattle to humans. And so that's what we're really especially concerned about, in addition to just the overall health of our free-ranging white-tailed deer herd in Michigan. So as I said, most infected deer appear healthy. Hunters that harvest these deer that turn out to be positive when they're tested oftentimes don't have any idea that the animal was infected with the disease. It's not until those later stages where you might see things that you would expect, such as emaciation, animals that aren't very active, they're intolerant to exercise, and then even coughing, sneezing, difficulty breathing. Bovine tuberculosis causes lesions in the animal's lungs. So as you can imagine, as it progresses, breathing would be difficult. It could cause that coughing and sneezing, and just generally lead to those other symptoms that I described. In the lower picture, we see lesions that are on the chest cavity, on the ribs there. And we always like to remind hunters that in less than half of the deer that we find, I'm sorry, Katie, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I apologize. And then you can jump to the next one. There we go. So there's those lesions I was talking about, and you can see sometimes in the lungs and other organs as well. But we like to remind hunters that in less than half of the deer that end up getting submitted and found to be TB positive, the hunters did not see anything inside that deer to make them suspicious that it had TB. It's only by submitting that animal's head at a check station so that it can get screened at the lab and checked where we see in those lymph nodes that the lab looks at that the animal actually shows signs of the disease. That's the first place that you can really detect that, is in the lymph nodes. And we don't want hunters to do that on their own. So just a reminder that just because the deer looks healthy, both outwardly and once you're field dressing it, that it can still be positive. And again, it's a disease that people can get. And so we really do want to be cautious about that. That's why we have a surveillance program, a bovine TB surveillance program in Michigan. And so really in 1994, once we detected that second animal, we started a statewide surveillance program. I'm sure our hunters are familiar with the check stations that we've had across the state for decades. And in addition to collecting really important biometric data about the deer and that harvest, it also provides an opportunity for hunters to submit their heads, the deer heads, that is, for TB testing. You can go to the next slide, Katie, thank you. And so these samples go down to the lab and are screened and allow us to see not only where on the landscape bovine tuberculosis is occurring, but also the apparent prevalence of the disease. And so that's the number of positives that are detected out of the total number of deer that are tested. And so you see this area outlined in red in the northeast, and that's Deer Management Unit 452. That's where the majority of the positive deer come from in Michigan and have and continue to come from. And pardon me, then the surrounding yellow counties, as well as Presque Isle and Iosco counties, comprise the Deer Management Unit 487. And so that's a deer management unit that is really specifically carved out and managed because of bovine tuberculosis. So we're here to talk about our surveillance and testing. And last year we had a change to what the kind of historical TB surveillance had been. And when we have these surveillance goals, this is not just something that the DNR decides and sets forth for hunters to say we would like to have a certain number of deer. The zoonotic nature of the disease means that we work in conjunction with the Michigan Department of Agriculture, because deer are a reservoir of the disease and it continues to spill over into cattle. And so that's something that is and can cause a tremendous impact to our cattle industry. So MDARD and the DNR work in conjunction and have a memorandum of understanding with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And in that MOU, that memorandum of understanding, that tells us how many deer we need to test from what area. And so we, in 2019, made a change to where deer have historically come from. In addition to just those yellow counties that you see on the map, we added some counties adjacent to that. So those are those orange counties. And the idea there is to collect deer from each of those counties to really detect whether the disease is spreading from that core area outward. So last year was the first time we tried to collect 300 heads from each of those orange counties individually, with the exception of Presque Isle, and the goal there is 500. And then we also have a quota of 2,800 deer from those yellow counties collectively. So as you see on the slide, we hit our goal there in the yellow counties, which is fantastic, and a big hats off to all the hunters that visit our check stations and submitted heads. And then in the surrounding counties, we did reach that 2,100 mark. However, we did not get some heads. We did not reach those individual targets. The collective target was over 2,100, but we need some individual goals to be met there as well. And then you see these circles in the rest of the state, and we have surveillance there because we've had TB positive cattle that have been found throughout the state. And when that happens outside of the core area, we want to test the deer around those cattle to make sure that the disease isn't being spread from those cattle to our free-ranging white-tailed deer in those areas. So we do surveillance there as well. And if you look down at the total there in that table, you see that in 2019, we had a total of 25,000 samples that were tested down in our wildlife disease lab. And so the majority of our samples actually came from outside of the core area, from around the state. And so we have a really good idea over our surveillance program history of where TB is and how we're maintaining that in the Northeast, in the core area, in DMU 452 especially. And Kelly will talk a little bit maybe about why the sample of TB heads is so high, is 25,000 outside of the TB area. And that's because in addition to CWD, anytime somebody submits a head, it is also tested for TB. So again, we have a really good idea throughout the state where the disease is being detected. Next slide, please, Katie. As we zoom into that core area, we can see that the 31 positives from 2019 were, for the most part, right in DMU 452, Deer Management Unit 452, the core area for TB, right where we would anticipate them to be. And we do have a handful of deer that were detected outside of that core area. However, they are still within that 6-county DMU 487, which included Alpena, Alcona, Oscoda, and Montmorency counties, plus Presque and Iosco. And that number of 31 is kind of right in line with where we would expect those numbers to come in at. We've seen anywhere from around 12 to 49 deer positive per year over the last 10 years. So there wasn't anything usual about last year. And next slide, please. I mentioned prevalence. So we use all these samples that come in to determine the apparent prevalence of the disease. So the last slide I showed you showed the distribution across the landscape of where we found those deer, where those deer were detected. And the prevalence kind of, like I said before, tells us the amount of the disease, kind of. So the number of positives out of all the samples taken. And so we look at this as an apparent prevalence as a percentage. And starting back when we started our surveillance program in the mid-90s there, you can see it was between 4 and 5%. And over the years, our management and hunter commitment to not baiting and antlerless harvest and just continuing to really enjoy hunting was what allowed us to bring that prevalence, that apparent prevalence, slowly down over the years. I know that 4% to under 2% isn't anything that you would really write home about or seems like some huge achievement, but for a difficult disease like bovine tuberculosis, that really was tremendous progress. And so really want to thank all the hunters that participated in helping to manage our deer herd over the decades. And we look at multiple year trends, so 5-year trends in the prevalence to kind of monitor this disease. And as you can see in that red box, the prevalence is a little bit elevated from where it has been in the past. And so that's something that we really will closely continue to watch and monitor and kind of see what happens, in the following years to show if we need to make any management changes to really help try and bring the disease back, the prevalence back in the right direction with the tools that we have available to us. And the importance here is that as the prevalence increases, then it poses an increased risk to our cattle herds and that industry, again, because the disease can spill over from deer to cattle and continues to do so. And when we see that prevalence in the deer increase, then it's more likely that the disease can and will spill over to cattle. And so I'm going to stop right there and hand this over to Phil, who's going to talk a little bit more about that side of bovine tuberculosis.
Good evening. My name is Phil Durst. I'm with Michigan State University Extension, and I work with cattle producers, both dairy and beef throughout northern Michigan and down through central Michigan. And I'm going to start sharing my screen. Just give me a second here to do that. And why don't I see my presentation there on my screen? Katie, I'm looking at a share screen that says basic, desktop, whiteboard, iPhone, all those kind of things. And basically, I'm just looking for my desktop, and I click on that, and I don't find it. A PowerPoint,
Don't
maybe?
find it. Good question. I struggled with that as well, and then all of a sudden it popped up. So maybe stop, like X out of your screen share and then hit screen share again and see if it comes up.
It did not.
It did not. Okay.
Well, why don't we work from your computer and
Same presentation.
that's what I sent this evening.
Okay. Give me 1 second to
So
bring that
pardon
up.
us, folks, for the technology problems that we're experiencing. Oh, Zoom, as Katie just said recently.
Phil, do you want to just go ahead and start talking? Because this is telling me that I have to download your presentation, and that's going to take just a few minutes.
Okay. So let's talk about the cattle side of things a little bit. Well, as Emily showed you a graph of the prevalence of TB in deer, the point I want you to remember about that graph is that it was not zero. The prevalence was not zero, and frankly, the trend was not headed towards zero. What I would show you right now, if I could, would be a graph of the infected cattle herds. And every year we have infected cattle herds. And again, the graph is not zero. And again, the trend is not to zero. So we have a problem. The problem is that deer herd prevalence results in cattle herd infection. And that happens because deer deposit the bacteria by leaving saliva on feed, whether that's grass and pasture, whether it's feed in storage or feed in the feed bunk in front of cattle that may be eaten by cattle while the bacteria are still viable. Well, let's talk about what effect that has on the farm, because you see, TB is what we call a regulated disease. That is that it's reportable and it's regulated by both the state government, the state Department of Agriculture, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In fact, it's regulated internationally. And every year, herds in the TB area are tested. They're tested for TB. So when a herd is tested, let me just explain that process to you a little bit so that you better understand that. The animals are most often run through a chute. So they're run through a corral into a chute. The chute slams shut. The animal breaks and is held there while at the back of the animal, they are injected in the area of the tailhead with a quantity of test material, We call this a caudal fold test because cattle are injected in what is called the caudal fold of the tailhead. And 3 days later, they're run back through the chute to check the area for swelling. So run them into the chute, inject them, release them. 3 days later, come back, run them into a chute, check them for swelling. Swelling would indicate a reaction to the test material. If there's a reaction, these animals are called suspect, and they're started on the next test. That's the comparative cervical test, in which the animal is again injected, but there's 2 injections of test materials that the degree of swelling to those is going to be compared. So day 1, caudal fold. Day 3, read caudal fold. Day 6 is a comparative cervical read, and as animals have been through the chute 3 times then is 6 days. There's risks to that, risks upon risk upon risk. Putting cattle through chutes carries various risks. First of all, there's a risk to the handlers. For personal safety, cattle don't like to go through these things per se. Anytime you move cattle, you run a risk of injury from cattle. And then also there's a risk to the cows themselves, the risk of potential injury and the loss of production. And there's the risk to the unborn offspring from those cows, from handling. They may abort afterwards. So there's these risks that are inherent in it. And we just went through these cattle, all cattle day 1, all cattle day 3, and some cattle day 6 went through the chutes. But the greatest risk, the one that hangs over farmers year after year, is that of a positive test. It weighs on their hearts and minds. If you've ever been to the doctor and had tests and then waited on pins and needles for the results, that's what it's like every year for the past 20 years for these farmers. It affects their decisions about how much they're going to invest in their business. And frankly, it affects whether their kids are interested in taking over the farm. What happens to a positive herd? Well, when a herd is found positive, immediately the herd is quarantined. Quarantine means that animals don't leave the farm except to slaughter. And so the farmer has to feed animals that he didn't plan to feed. So that's more mouths to feed with no more feed that he had in storage than what he has. And so we have the quarantine effect. And then all suspect animals are removed, sacrificed, and lab tested. So some animals are killed and sent to the lab. There's a retest of the whole herd with removal of any other suspects. And then either as a continuation of that, as a test and remove, where we test, remove, test, remove, test, remove, or if herd prevalence is high and indemnity money is available, complete destruction of the herd. We call that depopulation. Farmers face this every time they get a test. And finally, there's a herd plan that limits what a farmer can do and how they must do it. I know we all chafe at being told what to do and how to do it. Farmers no less than that. And the reality is that farmers will be under quarantine for 6 to 12 months, maybe even longer. That means animals piling up that they really cannot and should get rid of. Now, the state Department of Agriculture works very hard to develop a plan that will enable farmers to stay in business. But there's limitations from our federal partner, USDA. And in a business that either has very narrow positive margins or even negative margins, negative returns, it can be enough to put them out of business. It's tough enough in this business to stay alive when you've got everything working for you. When you have a positive test for TB, it can be the end of a business. So with all this risk hanging over things, what they want to do as much as possible is prevent the risk of infection. Prevention is always the key. Every farm in the high-risk area has had a risk assessment team walk the farm with them. And during that time that we walk the farm with them, we identify potential risks to the cattle from deer. And we also identify ways to reduce those risks, whether it's by fencing or by facilities or by management. There's ways that we talk about as ways to reduce those risks. Fences, the farmers have fenced feed storage. They've changed feeding habits. They've changed grazing plans. They've changed water locations. They've changed mineral feeding. They've changed feed storage. Frankly, as I drive around the non-TB area and see things that other farmers do and get away with because the deer don't have TB in that area, I think, how is it even that those farmers in Northeast Michigan compete? So they've changed things, but even changing all those things is reducing risk. It's all that can be done is reduction of risk. It is not possible to eliminate risk. And cattle herds have continued to become infected. And the problems include high deer density and deer that get acclimated to farms, acclimated because that's where they've had their young, that's where they've grown up, and that's where they've eaten. And this is where their interest and your interest as hunters coincide. You see, TB is not a hunter problem. TB is not a farmer problem. TB is a community problem. And you're members together of a community with farmers, with businesses, everybody together are members of that community. And it is the community that needs to work together on this. And so I would say to you, and I would encourage you to be a good partner with farmers. There's the possibility of hunting on farmland, of course, with permission, but using their permits. And there's certainly the need to take more antlerless deer. And as Emily talked about earlier, and is going to talk about again, there's the need to turn deer heads in to be checked. Farmers and hunters need to work together, need to be partners in solving the problem of TB. It's a community problem, and by working together, we can solve those problems. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you, and after all the presentations, I'll be happy to try to answer your questions. Back to you, Emily.
I'll wait for Katie to pull my presentation back up and play musical presentations here.
Bear with me one second. Sorry, Phil, your presentation is still downloading, so I apologize for that.
Or just go ahead and pull Emily's back up. Yep.
There we go.
Perfect. So Phil left us off in the perfect place. Where can we go? What can you do as hunters to be part of that community and contribute and help those cattle producers in your area or in the state for that matter, to be able to continue to sell their cattle and have a viable industry and have that income for their family and maintain that livelihood. And also to how can you help to manage bovine tuberculosis in the deer herd in Michigan and keep those deer healthy that you are passionate about and love to hunt. And a really easy thing that hunters can do is to submit deer heads for testing if they are successful in harvesting one or more. And so the 2020 bovine TB surveillance goals are what we see on this slide that's shown right now. And so we still have those orange counties surrounding the yellow counties. You see that some of those testing circles outside of Northeast Michigan have moved and shifted. So be aware of those if you are in those areas, and know that those circles where we need 300 heads, if you're down in Allegan or Barry or Ottawa counties, or up in Emmett County, if you're hunting or harvested deer in those areas, you don't have to visit that particular check station, but it is really important for us to collect those heads, and it's tremendously appreciated if you're able to submit heads from those areas. So even if you're not in the Northeast, those circles there are still important surveillance areas as well. So in the orange and yellow shaded counties, we have those same surveillance goals that I talked about that we dipped our toe in the water last year and started. So again, in those 4 yellow counties, our quota is 2,800 heads collectively. And we historically have done a really good job of reaching that number because people in the area are concerned about the disease and want to get that test to make sure that the deer that they're harvested is healthy, that they're going to feed themselves and their family. And to be honest, they're kind of in the habit of doing that. A lot of the hunters come to the check stations and they know the drill, and they are proud to give us that head and prepared for it. And that's a little bit different in those orange counties. This is something new, these increased testing quotas that we have. We didn't have those 300 heads per county before last year. And Phil talked about the strain and the burden on cattle producers and the risk to all those involved in testing cattle. And the reason he did that is, one, so that as a hunter you have a better idea of what the other component of the community that is dealing with TB faces, and also to help understand some of the consequences that are spelled out in the Memorandum of Understanding with USDA if we don't meet those quotas. And so individually, if those orange counties do not reach their 300 head quota, with the exception of Presque, which is 500, then the cattle herds in those counties must be tested for TB. And so that is a significant burden. It is a significant expense to the state, and it's something that we can prevent and avoid if we just get those 300 heads from those counties. And it sounds really easy because we have thousands of hunters and thousands of deer that are harvested, but some people just aren't comfortable or familiar with, or maybe don't want to be inconvenienced with going to check stations. And so we do have some that are a little more challenging. And like I showed you before, the collective goal for those orange counties was actually met, but individually we didn't reach 300 in all of them where we needed to. And so it is something that we really are encouraging our hunters to do, is just take a minute to visit a check station. And if you're not comfortable doing that this fall, then find a drop box where you can submit your head for testing and help contribute to these quotas and the management of this important disease in Michigan. And this is clearly a priority for the Michigan Department of Agriculture because of the cattle industry and impacts to cattle. And TB has been made a priority for the Department of Natural Resources for our deer check this fall, and making sure that we provide as best we can the check stations and the options, drop boxes, or working with processors for people to submit their deer heads to get them tested. Next slide, please, Katie. If you haven't visited a check station before, or even if you have, it's a good idea before you head out to submit that deer head to check out www.michigan.gov/deercheck. That's where we have the most up-to-date list of statewide, all our deer check stations and drop boxes. And so you will see a significant change from the locations and hours of operation from the past because of challenges due to funding, not just because of the current state of Michigan or Michigan's budget because of the pandemic, but also because our number of hunters and the funding from hunting dollars is slowly declining over the years, and that is contributing as well. And so with TB being a priority, we have maintained and increased those options for check stations and drop boxes in the Northeast. to the best that we can, where you might see more changes elsewhere in the state. And Kelly, Dr. Straka might touch on that in her portion about CWD, but just please note that there are some changes to where those check stations are or what the hours used to be. So definitely check out that website to make sure that you're heading somewhere where there's going to be a place for you to submit that deer head. And with that, I am all set.
Okay, I think that is turning over to me then, you guys. Straka, I'll share my screen as well. No, please. And you would think after all the times, the fact that we do this so often, that this comes naturally. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but let's just see. Can you guys see my slides?
Not yet, Kelly.
Okay, that's fine. They should be coming up. I'm screen sharing. You will be able to see, hopefully, a sign that says chronic wasting disease. Please, Katie, let me know when you guys can see it. In the meantime, I will at least just introduce myself for a second, and I can start talking if needed. I am Kelly Straka. I am a wildlife veterinarian and the Wildlife Health Section Supervisor for the Michigan DNR. So thank you guys for being here tonight. I can't see obviously who's all here, but I really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to come listen to us. I know we had some technical difficulties. Emily and Phil, you did a great job trying to get through those. We are running a little bit behind schedule, so I'll probably go pretty quickly through my slides. It does say I'm screen sharing and I can see it okay. Are you guys seeing anything?
It hasn't quite come up yet, but it says that you are sharing your screen. So I think eventually it'll come up. So we should be good.
It'll catch up, that's fine. So I did take out, I'll just start talking now. I did take out some slides on what the disease is. I believe our brilliant brilliant management specialist, Chad Stewart, spoke a couple weeks ago at one of these webinars. If you didn't get a chance to catch that, please do. So I know he talked about deer eggs. I'm not going to go into much of the disease behind CWD right now. Anybody who wants to know that, please let me know. We do have a recorded presentation on our website. I can direct you that way, and that really talks about a lot of the epidemiology or a lot of the transition factors that are leading into CWD, as well as what the science is indicating that disease really is. What I wanted to focus to tonight is talking a little bit more about surveillance and what we have done and where we are going into the
Kelly, I think we lost you.
Yeah, Katie, the host muted everybody. Am I here? Because it says that everyone's muted.
Yep, you're here. You're good.
Oh, lovely, lovely. All right. All right. Can you see my screen?
Nope.
Okay. Okay. So what I am looking at, and unfortunately you guys aren't, and so I can walk us through it. That's okay. I'm looking at basically the picture of chronic wasting disease across our country right now. So Michigan is not the only state that's dealing with this. Certainly this is not only a nationwide issue, but an international issue. There was a big news that came out last week that the disease was just found in Norway. It was first found over there in 2016 in a relatively small reindeer herd, about 2,000 animals. That country was very aggressive and they did exterminate that entire herd. And they're planning on holding, they used both free hunting licenses. A lot of hunters came in and they turned to sharpshooting to remove all those animals from the landscape. Obviously a very drastic, aggressive reaction, but definitely what they felt was necessary to eradicate the risk of the disease spreading throughout the reindeer herd. Unfortunately, last week they did find another case in the southern part of the country, and that is in Norway's largest reindeer herd. So I don't know what they're going to be doing with that now, but that is certainly a big issue for Norway. So while we turn to what's happening in the States, you can see, well, I don't know if you can see right now, But certainly there are a number of states that are dealing with this. I think we're up to 26 states that have detected CWD in either captive or free-ranging animals. So my next slide, even though I doubt you can see it quite yet, Katie, please jump in when you can see them. We started surveillance for chronic wasting disease here in Michigan back in 2002. So that very first year we started, we tested over 4,000 animals. So since that time, we have been testing across the state for chronic wasting disease. We did not detect it in our free-ranging deer herd in 2015. That year, the very first year when we first detected it, we did find it in 5 individuals. Running up through the end of last year, so again through the end of 2019, we have tested over about 114,000 animals, and we are over that now. Certainly that was where we were at right at the end of 2019, at the end of our surveillance season. So we have detected the disease confirmed in approximately 189 animals. I say approximately because I think I have one pending. However, all of those animals have only been localized in 9 different counties across the state. So the vast majority of those positives have been found in Montcalm and northeastern Kent County. We also have a small focus of infection so far detected in southern Jackson County. We have a single case in the UP in Dickinson County, and then we do have a few scattered cases over in Gratiot and Ionia and Ingham County, Ingham and Clinton County, and Ingham was where we first had our first detection back in 2015. So I do have up for you right now, which unfortunately you cannot see, but I will talk to Katie after this is over about sharing some of these slides with her, and maybe she can post these on the website so you guys can at least see some of this information. And then I'm just looking at the run through of surveillance from 2002. So my next slide I was really hoping to share with you was our 2019 CWD surveillance summary. Now, please keep in mind this is available on our website. So if you go to michigan.gov/CWD, you will be able to see basically the map I was hoping to share with you right now. It is a surveillance summary from 2019. We did test 20,071 animals. So the reason I really wanted to point this map out to you guys is because it does a really good job of showing where we got those samples from, and where we get samples from matters. So when you look across the state, like I mentioned, we have 9 counties where we detect the disease, right? And those are also the 9 counties where we have focused most of our surveillance resources. So we have really poured surveillance numbers into there. In some of these counties, Montcalm County is a good example. Last year, we set our goals to find the disease at 1% prevalence. So what that means is in Montcalm County, we know the disease is there, right? So we set the goals to find it if 1% of all the animals that are there, if 1% are infected, we wanted to set our goals to find it. It doesn't make sense to set it much lower than that because that's about where we thought, or where we know from previous surveillance that level of infection is. When you move to areas like southern Isabella County is right next to Montcalm County. Again, much easier if you could see this map. But Isabella County, we have not detected the disease. But when we look at it, when I say we haven't detected it, that doesn't tell you anything about where have we looked or how hard have we looked, how many deer have we tested. So if I tell you that we've tested 10 deer in Isabella County and haven't found the disease, I'm not comfortable saying that county is CWD free. It just means that we've tested a few deer and haven't found it. So when we start looking at some of those counties where we haven't found these, we obviously want to set that threshold for detection, our ability to find the disease, we want to set that a lot lower. So the example I gave previously about setting it at 1% in Montcalm County, that worked in Montcalm County because we found it there before, right? But we haven't found it in Isabella. So we actually set the detection threshold at 0.1%. So really early in the infection. So if the disease is there, we have to test a whole lot of animals to find it, but that's what we want to do. And so that's where you'll see these really high surveillance goals in some areas. It's because we really want to look there. We consider that area very high risk for disease introduction for a number of factors. Isabella is a good example because of the proximity right there to Montcalm County where we found a lot of positives. Really need to find that edge of infection, and that really matters because all the science is showing us that our best chance at management is if we catch the disease early. So if we go in and we find it at a high percentage, if you go in and oh man, I feel so bad for folks in Arkansas and folks in Tennessee, when in Arkansas they went in 2015 and they found CWD for the first time ever, maybe it was 2016, and they go in and by the end of that first surveillance season, they had detected 23% prevalence, right? In Newton County, Arkansas, 23% prevalence. that's really challenging because there's not a lot you can do from a management perspective if almost a quarter of the animals you test are positive. That makes it really hard. We're not in that situation here. So we're really fortunate in Michigan. I never want to say unfortunate because we have CWD, but we have found it at a very low prevalence. So what we really want to try to do is find it again on those outskirts where we can use management we can use our surveillance to best inform management. And I hope that's making sense to you guys. This is always so hard. I feel like I'm just talking to myself. Maybe I am. Maybe I disconnected a while ago and now I'm just rambling.
Kelly,
Yeah.
Kelly, I pulled your slide set that you sent me the other day, so the map is up.
Oh, perfect. So you want to jump to the next?
Sure.
Where all the dots? Oh, I can see it. Oh, Katie, this is
See
great.
it?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So if you back one with the red dots, that's amazing. Oh, you guys, Katie is working her magic here. So what you're looking at here, this was actually the next slide I was going to show. So this is beautiful. So this is looking at what we found after that 2019 surveillance season. You can see these red dots indicate locations of positive animals. So again, as I talked about, that southern Isabella County, we have not detected the disease. But so we ideally want to find the disease if it's there very, very early. And in order to do so, because this is rare, we have to set our surveillance goals really high. I hope that makes sense. We absolutely can talk about this during the discussion period. I'm going to try to not belabor it too much here. So as I mentioned, we tested over 20,000 deer last year, 65 positives. So we did 65 positives. Just for comparison, some people love comparisons. Wisconsin tested about the same as we did. They tested about 19,000 last year and found over 1,300 positives. So we have a very different situation than even our immediate neighbors to the west. So again, you can see the distribution of samples here. Next slide, please, Kate. Beautiful. Okay, this one's kind of confusing and I'm not going to talk about it too much, just in the interest of time. I am realizing it's almost 8 o'clock. So one of the things I just wanted to point out is we have tested a lot of deer. And if you had been with me a couple slides ago when I really looked at where our samples were, we don't have to go back, but where I really looked at where our samples were, we've tested a lot of deer. So again, let's look at that southern Isabella County because I think it's an example here. So I told you before, I would really like to be able to detect disease as early as possible, right? And so we use our surveillance goals to find it at different percentages. So in southern Isabella, I'm really worried about that because it's so close to Montcalm. Let's set our detection threshold at 0.1%. I think I said that earlier. So again, 0.1%. So if 0.1% of the deer were infected, we would be able to find it, right? So when I look at this, look at the number. If you can see where Isabella County is, it's just to the northeast of Montcalm there. You can see the 0.5%, right? What that means is based on our surveillance to date, so based on the number of deer that we've looked at in that area of the state, I can be pretty confident that the disease, if it's there, is in no more than 0.25% of the deer. So people, that's pretty good. Unfortunately, that does mean, based on, again, on our best models, the best science we have out there, that does mean there could be 67 animals there that are as of yet undetected. That makes me a little nervous. So I think this is Katie's attempt to make me jump ahead, Kate, because you're jumping through the slide. But that's okay. I'm flexible. We can adapt. So anyway, I don't want to beat this topic too long, so we can go back to it if you want. But I hope that explains a little bit of how and why we set these crazy numbers. And people call me all the time, and they're like, "Where are you getting this stuff?" Well, I don't just make up. A, I'm not that intelligent. And B, we actually have a really good epidemiologist, which is a fancy word for a guy or a girl who really understands disease dynamics. And he does. I mean, he does this, and he does a phenomenal job with it. I try to stumble my way through it, but hopefully you guys are following me so far. These maps are available. I'm happy to share them with anybody and definitely happy to talk about them a little bit more when we have time. So Kate, next slide. Okay, so this is the big question, right? So tonight's talk is for hunters. So I'm assuming I have some hunters here who are like, that's great, Kel, but what does this mean for me? Okay, I will tell you. So one of the things we really worried about when we start looking at what's happening in the state is we have done a lot of surveillance in that 9-county area that I showed you, right? So the 9 counties are on this map, you can see on your screen. We have done a lot of surveillance. I've already talked a little bit though about how even in spite of a lot of surveillance, there are a lot of testing, we can't be really confident that we fully understand the extent of this disease. So one of the big questions that's always kind of a hard thing to juggle is, do you continue to devote your resources to areas where you know the disease exists and look for that edge? Or do you actually start to allocate some of your resources around the state so that we can have a little bit better confidence that, for example, we don't have a problem in the thumb, or we don't have a problem in the Northwest, or we don't have a problem, you know, even in the Northeast up in TB country. So how do you really do that? I will tell you that our executive, our leadership, sat me down at the end of last year, and gosh, that sounded really bad. It didn't sit me down like I was going to be chastised, but we sat down and we had a conversation about the importance of really trying to get a better understanding of the disease in Michigan. The disease in Michigan. So we have partnered for years with a group called the Wildlife Center. They are out of Michigan State University. The Wildlife Division has worked with this group of disease specialists and modelers on previous projects. We did them, and they did have a number of folks that came with a couple models based on risk-based surveillance. As some of those models have been published, some of those are going through the publication, but certainly we have sat down with them to say, okay, where else should we be looking, and how hard do we need to look? We were really hoping to roll it out this year. I think I need on this that we had a number of challenges in 2020 that honestly prevented us from making a significant shift to our surveillance model this year. So I am not one to say it's simply because of COVID-19. I'm not one to say it's simply a financial shortfall. It's all of it. So to be honest, we ordered the PPE, the personal protective equipment that we need to use in the lab to do testing. We ordered it back in January, and it's still back ordered. We lost a number of our staff. We have a number of staff that now no longer be on the floor, on our necropsy floor, because they are home with their kids. We have ED3 and ED4, the executive directives that prevented spending for a long time, and also prevented hiring of additional staff. We also in the disease lab were closed for 5 months. So we had a backlog of all of the samples that would normally come all year long logged. And so I had a dump truck in the lab delivering 15 yards of carcasses for us to go through in the northern lower. So not to make a lot of excuses, I really hate that. I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses, but the fact of the matter is this was not the year that we could start national statewide surveillance system for chronic wasting disease, but it is certainly our intention and the plan of our executive division to get there. So I would anticipate what you could say is a more robust rotational surveillance system for 2021 and moving forward. This year, we really had to say, okay, what do we need to do now? What can we do now with what we have? So I would absolutely consider this a transition year for surveillance. Okay, so looking at this picture, Katie, I'm a little nervous now because I'm not sure what slides you have, so I don't know what to expect. This is like, I'm on the edge of my seat too. Why don't we jump to the next slide and see what's all here? Okay, this is a good one. All right, now I'm gonna ask you, Katie, not to give you carpal tunnel, but could you jump back a slide again? I'm really not bossy in my life. So if you look again at this map, I know I haven't talked on this yet. So when you look, there are 4 what we are calling priority surveillance areas. I already talked a little bit about the southern Isabella. You can see it's highlighted here in green. We also have western Gratiot, southern Jackson, and the Dickinson County, which we call the UP CWD core area. It's Dickinson, a little bit of Menominee, and a little bit of Delta counties. So those are our 4 priority surveillance areas for 2020. In those areas, we will be accepting samples for CWD from October through January. Okay, so that's everything. We want samples from there. We will take any samples from any year that's harvested there to test for chronic wasting disease. Why? If you go back to that weird green map that I kind of talked about, but I kind of jumped past, that map identified those areas as the highest risk for disease, but we didn't get enough samples to really be confident that we understand it there. So I hope that makes sense. Those are the 4 areas that we either have found disease or really suspect it's there and we just haven't tested enough to find it. And we want a clearer picture, a more clear picture of what the disease looks like there. So those are the 4 priority areas. Again, we will take samples from there all seasons, including archery. Now, if you look, The 9 shaded areas, this is where things get a little different. And this is where I know it's going to take some explaining to people. The 9 shaded counties are counties where we have detected CWD previously, okay? We will absolutely test deer from those counties if they're harvested from November 15th to November 18th and brought to us. So they have to be brought to a check station only those first 4 days of the firearm season. Why those first 4 days of the firearm season? If you recall that I had said that we were working with the Boone and Crockett Quantitative Wildlife Center, some of those modelers use first 4 days of firearm season to feed their surveillance model. So in order for us to move to this rotational statewide surveillance system, they need that kind of data to go ahead and help us develop our surveillance moving forward. So that was how that time frame came about as well. So we absolutely will test deer from there. You will see here on the lower left-hand corner of that map, it says CWD testing in the rest of the state is available at a participating USDA approved lab. So when you look at this map, anything in white, CWD testing can be provided, but only through an outside lab. The DNR will not be able to test deer from there this year. I am hoping that changes next year, but this year that's where we're at. In the gray, DNR will test those heads for free in those gray areas the first 4 days of firearm season. Outside that window, again, hunters are going to have to use an outside lab. So let's go to the next slide because this is a really important point, and I realize this is going to be a big change for people. This is the biggest change. This is a slide that I actually showed our staff earlier this week in trying to explain some of this. We know that we have decreased check stations and drop boxes. We know that the number that was due to the logistics and the challenges that we had this year with planning all of this, as well as some of the restrictions that were on us. But please note that second bullet that's on there, the ability of hunters to submit samples directly to the approved labs, even though I can't in my lab test everyone's deer this year for a number of reasons, I wanted to do everything we all did. We all wanted to do everything we could, make sure hunters could get a test if they so desire. So I want to ensure, I want to do everything I could to facilitate hunters could have a CWD test. I never wanted to seem like we will not help with that, but it will come at a cost. So let's talk about that for a second. If you look at the lab on the bottom left-hand corner, that's the University of Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. There are about 20 labs in the country that are approved by the United States Department of Agriculture to conduct CWD testing. Of those 20 labs, we reached out to all of them, and I asked them 2 questions. 1, will you accept samples for CWD testing from a Michigan hunter? So basically, could our guys and gals send you a sample? And 2, if so, will you work with us to share the data with us so that I know, not to get anybody's personal information, but I know how many deer have been tested across the state, how many have been positive, and how many are not detected. Obviously, that's really important information that we don't want to lose, right? So I asked every lab if they can do that. 2 labs came back and yes, we can. Wisconsin was one of them. Michigan State University is the other one. Now, here's the kicker. Wisconsin is online now. They can take samples now. Their submission form is on our website now. Michigan State is not yet ready. That's a really important point. Michigan State University is working really hard to get everything up and running. They are right now on track to be open by October 1st. But if you call them right now, they cannot accept a sample. So any of your youth season samples, any of your early analysts cannot go to Michigan State yet. But hopefully we can get there. Keep in mind, you can freeze samples. So that's an important point too. The cost is going to vary. When I hunted in Colorado, it cost me $25 to have a CWD test. If you want to submit a sample, if you as a hunter want to submit a sample to Wisconsin, it's $21.50 for the test. I think that's a reasonable amount. I do. Unfortunately, that is in Wisconsin. So you have to pay to ship your samples to Wisconsin. UPS is going to charge you, and Wisconsin will send you the shipping label and do everything for you. I mean, they make it easy. Going to be an additional $15 for shipping unless you feel like taking a road trip to Wisconsin. So keep in mind, once you add everything up, it looks like it adds up, right? So $21.50 for the actual test, $15. I just tried to do the math and my head is failing. How embarrassing is that? $21.50 for the test, $15 for the shipping, okay? So that's where we're at with Wisconsin. Michigan State right now, the test is going to cost you $30. And they are working with UPS this week to finalize details on shipping. So I don't know that. You can deliver those samples to the lab. Obviously, if you're close proximity, that will help. But the test itself is going to cost you $30 at Michigan once they get it up and running. Okay, slide. I'm very cognizant of time, and I'm sorry I tend to talk so much. Okay, so I keep talking about you can bring a sample to the lab. You can bring them a whole. I would recommend it. They will charge for a whole head. The cost that I just provided you is if the hunters actually collect the tissue sample from the deer. That makes people nervous. I understand. So my staff did is back in mid-August, we actually put together a video. It's about a 5-minute video, 5 minutes and 1 second. So I was a little bit over, but I tried. 5-minute video on really showing people how to collect the sample. There are a number of these videos out there from other states. Wisconsin, Montana, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Kansas, New York, Wyoming, Colorado, they all have videos on their websites on how to do this. So I think if a hunter's, really doesn't get what they need from our video, we will have links to all the other states, and hopefully see it enough times, enough people doing it, you'll be able to go through it, right? So we do have resources out there. I'm happy to talk to anybody at any time, try to walk you through this. So that video is out there. It is being reviewed right now. I just got another draft of it today. We're planning to have it posted on our website by the end of the week. Okay, so hopefully this will all be out there. Everything we will have, all these resources we will have out for everybody. And I'm also going to work with our website people to make it really accessible and really easy to see. So next slide. I have a dog barking at the door too. So, okay, that's it. That's good. Okay, so that was it for me. It is a little bit after 8. I'm sorry, I tried to talk pretty quick, but I'm absolutely happy to take any questions. I know Phil and Emily, you guys will too. So I will be quiet and let Katie take over. And thank you, Katie, very much for finding that slideshow.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. I'm glad it worked. Sorry, everybody, that we've had so many technical difficulties, but it's 2020, so what more can we expect? So we've got some questions in the Q&A pod as well as in the chat pod. So I'm just going to kind of start with the chat pod, and then we'll move over to the Q&A. So we have a question: what does a drop box look like?
So I can answer that. That is a great question. They are approximately like 3 feet deep by 3 feet tall by 5 feet wide, painted plywood boxes. And I'm familiar with the ones we had in the northern lower. I don't know exactly how they were all constructed throughout the rest of the CWD, particularly in the Southwest. But we had ours painted bright orange, and there are some instructions posted on those drop boxes that explain how to use them. So a mobile device is required because the hunter is going to need to submit some information about the harvest date and location, and then contact information. And then they'll have to tag the head that they're submitting and bag it. And so there's some plywood type box with a lid painted probably orange, and it'll have a DNR logo on it somewhere with laminated instructions there for hunters to follow.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. So the next question was about how much do tests cost to submit? Jennifer, thanks for plugging in that $21.50 for the lymph nodes. Kelly, is there a sense for whole heads? I wanted to say I read Wisconsin was like $46 for a whole head.
Yeah, so the whole head, I know the Wisconsin cost is on our website right now. I cannot remember what it is offhand, and I apologize, but I do want to say the whole head plus the shipping. Yeah, I think you were close to, sorry, I think you were close to $60 to $80. So it became, to me, it became what I would consider financially limiting. I think for most folks, it certainly would be for me, but the Wisconsin costs are on our website, and Michigan, they will provide those once they have everything finalized.
And I'll find that link quick and throw it in the chat as well. Because I think I have it bookmarked. But the next question is, what politicians or policymakers do you need citizens or hunters to contact to voice concerns with lack of funding to be provided to test deer in our state?
That's a really good question. Sorry, I'm having children wrangling over here. So that's a really good question, Scott. I see that you answered that. I don't know. I mean, I really don't. I'm not sure how a lot of that works, and that's a little bit outside of certainly what I do at the lab. I think what's always important to me is that we are communicating messages to our decision makers for the state on what we consider a priority, right? And I certainly think when you start talking about especially TB being a significant factor for the agriculture side of things as well as the public health side of things, that's a no-brainer. CWD, obviously we have very engaged hunters here in Michigan. I do a lot of speaking nationally, and people are always asking me, you know, like, oh, well, yeah, we test deer from anywhere, anytime, and it's crazy. And last year we tested like 7,000 deer, and I'm like, are you kidding? I tested 7,000 on Saturday, because our hunters are so engaged. And so I think when you start talking about what to communicate to policymakers, decision makers, it's always what you're passionate about, right? And hunters are a phenomenal group. I've never seen anything divide hunters as much as chronic wasting disease, but hunters are so engaged. And so I think as long as you share that passion with your decision makers, and again, stick to things that are important to you and important from my perspective to the resource, I don't think you can go wrong. So I don't know if that helped. And Phil, I don't know, maybe in some of your circles you have a better answer to that, but I'm sure I can just ramble for a few more minutes.
No, policy stuff is out of my hands.
Yeah, I avoid it like the plague, just so everyone knows. I'm perfectly happy showing you how to find lymph nodes in a roadkill deer that's been out there. Yeah, oh yeah, I'll go the roadkill deer that's been on the ditch for 3 weeks, but you asked me, you want me to talk to the legislator? And it's like, oh, I'm not good at this.
Okay, thanks for the question. Now, there's probably not a really good answer to that besides NRC, whoever you can get an ear from, but
actually, that's a good point, Kate, though. We do have, you know, our Natural Resources Commission. They're a great group of folks. We do have some new commissioners that I think are getting up to speed, and I'm much less familiar with the Ag Commission side. I don't know, Nancy, if you can weigh in on that, but our Natural Resources Commission is really engaged, very, very active on the topic of CWD, as is our administration with our director and deputy director. They've been, you know, really engaged in this topic. So those are always good folks you can reach out to too.
Thanks, Kelly. Jennifer, I think that we answered your question about sending lymph nodes and heads, so I'm going to dismiss that one. The next one, I hunt on the edge of a county boundary where CWD has been detected in one but not the other, the boundary of Washtenaw and Jackson. The DNR just sent a message saying that deer in Washtenaw County wouldn't be getting checked, but Jackson would, but only for about 3 days. Are there any other options available within Michigan?
Drag your deer.
So, I'm sorry, Phil?
Drag your deer into a county that tests.
Oh, here we go. Don't you even start with that. That did not come from me. No, I will say, so Washtenaw County, so if I understand your question correctly, you're hunting in Washtenaw County. We, again, are offering testing for free in Jackson County. We are not offering it in Washtenaw County. Again, I'm really hoping we can change that moving forward when we do a rotational surveillance, but we are where we are this year. So what is available to you, dear questioner, whoever asked that, is again to use those outside labs. So you can use that Wisconsin, the $21.50 plus shipping. If I were you, I would just hold tight until, if you can, if you've got a sample now, if you hunted early antlerless, if you can stick it in your freezer, you can store it and then submit it to Michigan, and then you won't have to pay shipping if you can drive to East Lansing and drop it off at the veterinary diagnostic lab. Again, that's going to cost you $30. I don't know if I mentioned this, but turnaround time for both labs should be about 2 weeks. So again, depending on where you are with your comfort level in waiting, you can submit to either lab and expect a turnaround in 2 weeks. One thing I did want to say too, I think it's really important for those hunters that are going to be submitting samples to a lab. if you want CWD testing, I mean, I would recommend think about that before you go and have your deer processed. And I realize this is one more thing I do because I do it too. I'm a bow hunter. And so you really have to think about, what am I going to do with that deer if I'm having this test done before I have test results? Because what I think is just a really challenging thing to deal with is if you bring that deer to a processor and you get your snack sticks and you get your jerky and you get all that delicious stuff made, and then you get positive test results after, you've already invested so much to have that processed. So I totally realize the challenges with keeping a deer, especially if you bow hunt early season. You can't just leave the deer hanging in October. Trust me, don't do it. Maybe you do, I don't know. Some people like extra flavor, but either way, I'm just saying, you know, if you can be comfortable with this, try quartering your deer, chunk out as much of the meat as you can, and keep it in a cooler. Again, that turnaround time is about 2 weeks. So if you can keep that meat cool for 2 weeks, hopefully you can get those results back. Also keep in mind, I say 2 weeks, especially early season. I do anticipate those results to come sooner, but that is that window that those labs are giving you. So I realize that was a lot of information, sorry.
Oh, no worries. And just to add to that, if you're home processing, on the MSU Extension CWD website, pretty soon in the next couple weeks, we'll have some information for home processing and how to label and kind of keep those deer that you're waiting on tests for separated prior to eating them, so that if you do get a negative test, you know which products to just throw right out. And then some videos on home processing and doing that safely. So
those are great resources, Katie. Thank you for working on that. Those are great.
Yeah. Are there any more questions? We've gone through all the question and answer poll and the question and answers and everything in the chat. So is there anything else anybody is wondering about? Yes, Jennifer, the processing videos, as soon as they'll be done, I can definitely send that out to the registration list. Yeah, no problem. Also, just keep an eye on both the MSU Extension CWD page and the DNR CWD page. We'll talk to each other. Well, we'll cross-post a lot of things because we want to make sure that people have access to information. And the best way to do that is just to make sure that they're up in a lot of places. The lymph node extraction video will also be up on the MSU Extension website too. I believe that's what we talked about, Kelly. So we want to just make sure that we're all on the same page and that we have access. You all have access to all of the information that's out there.
So if I can, Katie, there's just one more thing, and I will be completely remiss if I don't mention this, because I am very cognizant and sensitive to the fact that bovine tuberculosis is a zoonotic disease, right? Emily talked about that. Phil, you talked about that. So by that, I mean people can become infected with the bacteria that causes the disease. So I mentioned earlier when I showed you the map, and maybe you didn't even see the map, then I'm okay. But no, when I said basically the white counties in the map, we will not be accepting deer for chronic wasting disease. I will tell you that if you are hunting in Deer Management Unit 487, so which is our TB area, if you are in 487 and you shoot a deer and you want a CWD test, you are going to be asked to go to a staffed check station, not a drop box. Please go to a staffed check station, and that head can come to our lab and we will test that for you. That's for 2 reasons. One, I want to keep hunters safe. I don't want anybody in a TB area cutting into lymph nodes in a deer head. That puts you at risk of exposure to that bacteria. And 2, what Emily and Phil did a great job talking about is we really want as many samples as we can for TB testing from the TB area. So if you are a hunter in the TB area, you harvest a deer and you want a CWD test, you are going to be asked to please come to a staff check station. That is going to be in the lymph node removal video. It is in there, so you'll be reminded. It's also going to be on our website. So we're not outright trying to do CWD surveillance in that area, but again, I want to do the best we can to keep hunters safe. So I just had to put that little statement in there.
Yeah. Thanks, Kelly.
Kelly, I just want to make a point also about hunting in the TB area. We don't want to scare hunters away from hunting in the TB area. In fact, we want to encourage more hunters to hunt in that area. There are special seasons in that area, and the risk of shooting a TB deer is really fairly low. We talked about that apparent prevalence rate of around 2%. And so it's not that every deer is infected. We want you to feel comfortable about hunting in the TB area, but take precautions. Be safe, and remember, it is a disease that can be passed on to humans. So therefore, take the regular safety precautions that you should take, wearing gloves as you field dress your deer, and being careful about what you do. Those are all important, but please come up north and hunt in the TB area.
Absolutely, Phil. Thank you. Yeah, and that 2%, that's only in that really in deer management unit 452. So once you get out of that, I mean, we dropped on really quickly with the number of deer that we see testing positive for TB there. So absolutely, you know, take your precautions. I say this all in that lymph node video, wear gloves, and just don't cut into some of these tissues that are up in the head. So which normal hunters wouldn't. When you're field dressing, you're not going to be in the area that's any concern. So so certainly I thank you for that point. And yeah, I never want to scare any hunters away from hunting. And I worry sometimes that we focus so much about disease that scares people and it turns people off. And the reality is, you know, we have a phenomenal deer population in the state in terms of healthy animals. So I never want it to come across as like, this is too scary. Just be smart and educate yourself about things, and absolutely get out and enjoy your hunt.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kelly and Emily and Phil, for all of the knowledge that you've shared with everybody tonight. And with that, we'll conclude the webinar. And have a great evening, everyone. And we'll see you next week for our talk on home processing and best practices. And hopefully we'll have some resources completed by then to share with you. So we'll see everybody next week.